There's a lot of room in the middle to leverage sophisticated natural language processing, which is how I think of the current generative AI language model, to really change how litigators do their work.
This is Unlawful. Afternoon and welcome to Unlawful. As always, I'm Brandon Renken, and with me today is a friend and old college teammate, Jeff Chivers. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks a lot, Brandon. Really happy to be here.
This show is all to talk about lawyers, about all kinds of different stuff. And one of the things that we really had a lot of fun doing, honestly, is talking about people's path to becoming a lawyer. You kind of went on a little adventure after college that a lot of lawyers never take the time to do, right? So tell us a little bit about what you did after college before you started law school.
That's true. Good memory. When I was a senior in college, I was planning to go somewhere like Wall Street. And that was right around the time of the subprime mortgage crisis. And I decided instead to move to Taiwan. I actually connected with another alum who had been living there for more than a decade, also a lawyer. I spoke to him on the phone and I said, "Hey, should I move to Taiwan for a little bit?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely. You can live with me." That was pretty much enough. And I moved there. I lived with him for part of the time, and I stayed there for 2 years before.
What'd you do? Did you just do the thing that a lot of people do, teach English, or were you exploring other opportunities, or what were you doing there?
I taught for the Princeton Review, test prep.
Yep.
Taught for the Princeton Review, whatever they needed me to teach. And I spent most of my time studying Chinese, though. And that was what I spent 80 or 90% of my time on, and riding a moped around the streets of Taipei, which was also quite a lot of fun.
I forget, during that time period, you mentioned you were learning Mandarin, but I forget, were you a programmer in college, or did you pick that up on your own too?
My degree in school was computer science, so there was a good amount of programming, at that time.
Other than it being 2007-8, you were setting yourself up to be one of the new quants on Wall Street, huh?
It probably would have been along those lines.
So what brought you back?
Law school, for reasons I can barely remember now, but I did decide while I was there I was going to apply to law school, and I thought I was going to do corporate or transactional work in Asia, in the Greater China region, and went to my first year of law school and then worked for a firm in Beijing in my first summer. So I spent my first summer out during law school in Beijing. And then my second summer, I split between Hong Kong and New York, and thought that I would continue to be out there doing transactional work. And then I'd say, second and third years of law school, I just kind of fell in love with litigation. And that's pretty much why I stayed in the United States after that.
You ended up going to a big law firm, right?
Yes. Yep. I started at Sullivan and Cromwell in their New York office, and that's a pretty big law firm. But I think that counts.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's also one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, so you went to law school. You didn't know what you were going to want to do. You went to law school. You then went to Sullivan Cromwell. It's like, okay, so you're stuck there for a few years. But that's not what happened either. You kind of continued to have your eyes open to other opportunities. And then I want to let you tell it, because
do you know the story of how I ended up not being at Sullivan and Cromwell after a few years? Because it's an interesting one, which may or may not be airable.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You've told me the story before. It's one of those things where I want to ask you about it, but I more just want you to tell about it. So tell us a little bit.
Sure. So going back to the subprime mortgage crisis, right? I was going off to Taiwan, and a friend of mine, or a person who would become a friend of mine at that time, was working at a law firm called Dewey and LaBeouf, which you may have heard of.
Yeah, for sure.
He, after college, worked for Dewey and LaBeouf in their finance department. And then he went off to law school, and he and I met in law school. And then I was at Sullivan Cromwell. He was clerking in the federal court system. And around the same time, there was a sort of opportunity to litigate with my father, who's been a litigator for many years. Also around that time, my friend got indicted by the Manhattan DA.
Yeah.
And so he was unable to leave his clerkship and go work for the very prestigious law firm where he had been planning to go, due to being under indictment by the Manhattan DA. And so I was sitting with him in a coffee shop downtown Manhattan. And I was just thinking, there's an opportunity to litigate with my father in a small firm, My friend appears to need a job. And so I said, why don't we just go litigate with Joe? That's my father's name. Why don't we just go litigate with Joe until this indictment blows over? And so we did that. And we litigated together for about 1.5 years mostly out of the Western District of Pennsylvania. The indictment was dismissed eventually. My friend went on back to the prestigious law firm where he was going.
So you gave him the shot, and then he got past his trouble and he sold you out.
So then, the indictment got dismissed, and I said, most of our work here is done. You'll be fine. I'm going to see if Sullivan and Cromwell will allow me back. And they graciously did. So then I went back to S&C after that, and then on to the clerkships and other things.
Again, continue to keep your eyes open for other paths, right?
I did, yeah. And I think around that time frame was when there were sort of early signs in 2017, 2018, 2019 of the kind of technological change that I think is now really coming to the fore. And when I was at the Third Circuit with Judge Tom Ambrose there, my co-clerk, Theo, who was like Simpson Thatcher before then, he and I just got talking about what we think the future of the legal industry and litigation are going to be, given what was starting to happen in the machine learning space. And those conversations just built to where we decided after the clerkship we were going to start a tech company.
But that wasn't really your next step, though, was it? Because didn't you also start your own practice for a bit?
We started them at the same time. There were various reasons for that. One of them being I really enjoy litigation, and so certainly was not ready to just stop. And I think the other one is that building technology takes time, building software takes time, and we needed to kind of incubate for some period of years. So yeah, we started the law firm at the same time as we started the tech company, and gradually the tech company work grew as the law firm work kind of decreased, and it's been a sort of gradual 5-year transition.
You're kind of like a chicken sitting on an egg for a long time, right?
Pretty long time.
Yeah.
Pretty long time.
I'm going to ask you what your unlawful moment is. I think your unlawful moment might be right now, right? It might be this moment when your egg is hatching. I've talked to startup owners and I've talked to authors and I've talked to people who've done all kinds of other stuff, but never anybody who said, you know what? I have a technology that's not quite ready, but I think it's the future and I'm going to start planning for it. First of all, how do you approach that mentality? And second of all, how do you live with it on an everyday basis?
There's an evolving answer to that,
Sure.
Because it has been about 5 years. I think at the outset, Theo and I, in our planning, kind of tried to look as far forward as we could. And the way we thought about it in a paraphrase form is there's Google, there's OpenAI, or there's Microsoft, and they'll be doing what they're doing. And the question is basically, will they create general artificial intelligence, human-like or beyond human-like intelligence? And if so, over what time frame? And we said, maybe, but it'll probably be 10 to 15 years for them to do that. That was 2019.
Yep.
And so we basically said, okay, as long as they don't create truly general human-like artificial intelligence before 2029 or 2034, there's a solid 10 to 15 years here where there's a lot of room in the middle to leverage sophisticated natural language processing, which is how I think of the current generative AI language model, to really change how litigators do their work. And that was like the basic premise on what is the technical window for a company like what we would build.